Hey guys, so today's video I am so excited to film. It's probably my favorite video that I've prepped lately, like just in the preparation stages of this video, and I think it's gonna be one of my favorite videos to film. In case you didn't know, and you can't tell by my shirt, look how amazing this is, I'll link it down below. 13 Ghosts is one of my favorite movies of all time, not just horror movies, but movies in general. I don't know if it's the 2000s nostalgia or the backstory of how I fell in love with this movie and being traumatized by the movie poster when I was young, and then I watched it as an adult, fell in love with it. But I got an amazing suggestion from one of you to rank all of the 13 ghosts. And I wasn't sure what format to do this video because obviously I do a lot of tier lists, but I feel like tier lists can be very limiting. Like, do I put my favorite ghosts that are the scariest, the highest, or the lowest? You know what I mean? Sometimes my categories are limiting, and I just don't think that one would be appropriate for 13 ghosts, and there's only 13 of them, so there's only so many categories I would do anyway. So we're going to rank the 13 ghosts from my least favorite to my favorite, or the worst to the best. Also, I've grouped them into 4 different categories because after I had ranked them from worst to best, I realized they were already in these little categories, so I'll explain a little bit more as we go on, but you'll see what I mean. My personal ranking will be based on how terrifying they are and how threatening they are. Like, am I fearing for my life with these ghosts, also their general backstory and overall concept. And just to make this video a little bit more interesting, I will give a brief background to each of the ghosts in case you are not familiar with their backstories, because they are very, very interesting. Hopefully you can learn a little bit more about these ghosts and their personalities when they were alive. And obviously if you have the DVD for this movie, you will have the special features and the ghost files, which is basically my reference point and my source material for their backstories. But in case you don't have the DVD or are not familiar with them, I'll give a brief background anyway. Okay, so we're gonna start with the worst category. None of these are bad. I love all of the ghosts, just not equally. So this first category contains 4 of the ghosts, and these are my worst ones, the ones that I just are, you know, not scary at all, definitely not threatening, and overall just more sad. First up, my least favorite ghost, obviously we have to go with the broken heart. Obviously Arthur is not, in fact, a ghost, so he of course is going to be ranked last, but I had to include him because there's 13 ghosts. Obviously in the movie there's only 12 technically, but Arthur was meant to be the 13th one of the broken heart and was meant to sacrifice himself, but he did not. Anyone else, when you hear like sacrifice himself, he's going to sacrifice himself? No, you can't. That's all I can think about. Anyway, up next we have the second to worst ghost, and that is the withered lover. This, of course, is Jean Criticos, Arthur's wife, who was a loving wife and mother until one day a fire broke out in their house after they decorated the Christmas tree. Her husband, Arthur, assumed that she would get out of the house in time and went to rescue their 2 children. Unfortunately, when he left the house with his children, she was not out there, and firemen would not let him re-enter the house to save his wife. So obviously, she is no threat at all. She will not kill me. She is, you know, a very tragic soul. The least threatening out of all of the ghosts, of course. And she's just not a favorite. I mean, it's a tragic story, of course, and, you know, I feel bad for her, but she's obviously not terrifying at all. Up next, we have a very non-threatening ghost in the dire mother. And I think this one maybe is seen as kind of horrific, but I think it's really her son that makes the story horrific and not her herself. So the dire mother was originally a shy woman named Margaret Shelburne, standing only 3 feet tall. She joined a freak show circus owned by a man named Jimbo, and life became extremely difficult for her. She was physically assaulted by the tall man, which was another freak show act in the circuit, in the carnival, and thus the great child was born, her son Harold. She was then later accidentally murdered by some of the other acts in the freak show. This is another tragic tale, I would say. Her story is probably one of the saddest out of all of them because of what she had to go through, but I'm not ranking this based on how tragic their stories are or my favorite stories as far as like people, like if they were good people or not. She was not a good mother ultimately. I'm talking about these people like they were real or something. But she is obviously one of the least threatening because she herself, I don't think, would actually do anything. It's more so her son that would be a little bit horrifying, and he's coming later, trust me. And finally, in the non-threatening category, we have the firstborn son. This was a boy named Billy Michaels who was obsessed with the overall storyline of cowboys and Indians. His parents just brushed this off as a phase. However, one of the neighbor boys found a real life bow and arrow. This boy challenged Billy to a traditional game of cowboys and Indians. However, sure Billy's cap gun, little toy gun, was no match for the real bow and arrow. Now, he probably could hurt me, but I just don't see him as threatening. He doesn't actually like do anything really in the movie or really comes across as threatening at all. He's just not scary, you know what I mean? He's, even with an arrow through his head, not scary. I probably would switch, if I had to redo this video, the dire mother and the firstborn son. So like switch those around, and that's my actual ranking because I like the story more so of the dire mother. I think she's more interesting and more tragic. Okay, the next category is my meh category. Like these are just ones that are middle of the road. They're okay. They're somewhat scary, but I can probably outrun you. I don't feel a real genuine threat from these ghosts. So up next we have the Great Child. Obviously I just talked about his mother, but let's talk about Harold's backstory. So Harold was actually spoiled and smothered by his mother to the point where he had to wear diapers for his entire life. She constantly treated him like an infant and constantly babied him. And this pair were continuously tortured and tormented in this circus. And one night the other freaks in the freak show kidnapped his mother Margaret, and she died by suffocation. I think they had stowed her away or like hidden her somewhere where she could not breathe. Enraged by this, Harold grabs an axe and gets revenge on the rest of the freak show while people and patrons were there at the carnival. Jimbo, the leader of the carnival, found out what happened and had Harold tortured and killed. Like I said, Harold is definitely way more threatening than his mother. I don't think his mother would actually do anything to me, but she would sick her son on me. And her son is terrifying because he is massive, and I mean, maybe I could outrun him, but a little bit terrifying, but not so much. Still a very sad backstory though. So up next, we have the Torn Prince. So Royce Clayton in 1940 was the star baseball player on his high school's baseball team. A local greaser challenged him to a drag race where Royce lost control of his car. It flipped 3 times before bursting into flames, and everyone had to watch while he burned up in the fire. Now the legend says that his opponent actually purposefully messed with his brakes so he would crash. Okay, so maybe I can't outrun Royce, the Torn Prince, but like a baseball bat isn't that scary to me. I just don't think visually he's that threatening. I mean, his story is sad because I am terrified of car accidents. So visually he's a little bit scary since he's a car accident victim, but not that scary to me. I don't know, not that terrifying. He just has a little bat. He could probably kill me and probably would want to because of his tormented soul, but not so much. Okay, up next we have the Torso. The Torso to me has a little bit of a boring backstory, but visually is so good. So Jimmy Gambino grew up around betting and racetracks and gambling, and when he got older he opened his own gambling club. And one day a mob member approached Jimmy with a bet on a heavyweight fight in which Jimmy would then lose. So when Larry came to collect his winnings, Jimmy did not have the money. So Larry wanted to make an example out of Jimmy and chopped him into little pieces, wrapped them in cellophane, and dumped him in the ocean. The concept is cool. Like, it's interesting that it's like a mob member. I like how all the ghosts kind of take place around different time periods. I think that adds a lot of interest to these ghosts because they could come from any time. I ranked him a little bit higher though because of the visuals of him and the fact that he is just chopped up into little pieces. I find that visually terrifying, and if I saw that coming at me, I would be scared. However, could outrun it. Okay, the next category for this ranking are tragic ladies that I would want to help, but also please don't hurt me. Visually, these are all scary and terrifying to me and visually interesting, but also, you know, horrifying. Like, they're very scary to me. But all these women share, you know, sad backstories. So next up in my ranking is the Bound Woman. I've always been a fan of the Bound Woman. She actually was my favorite ghost for a really long time. But I have to go with my favorite, and you'll see why when I explain it later, but she has just always been fascinating to me. I think visually she is so scary. How many times am I gonna say visually in this video? But you know, what's another word for visually? She's terrifying looking, and scary when she does her little movements, because she was strangled to death. Anyway, so the Bound Woman named Susan LeGros actually grew up as a very privileged, popular girl who was a cheerleader and dated the captain of the football team. team. Now, she was known for flirting with multiple men and breaking a lot of guys' hearts until one day when she broke the wrong man's heart. During prom, Chet Walters, who was the captain of the football team, walked in and found her in the arms of another man. I should say boy, they're in high school. So the next day, the other boy was found beaten to death, and 2 weeks later, Susan's body was found. She was buried underneath the football field, which, how did no one see that? He dug up the football field? Like, someone would see that. But she was bound with rope and strangled by Chet's necktie. I don't feel like the bound woman would actually try to harm me. I don't think her soul is like that angry, or her ghost, her spirit rather, is that angry about it, but she just looks like a tortured soul. So I don't think she would actually hurt me, but I had to rank her high because she was my favorite ghost for so long. And I just really like her and like the way she looks and everything. I think it's very disturbing. Up next for scary ladies, we have the Pilgrimess. So Isabella Smith was a outcast in this New England town in 1675. Livestock around this town began mysteriously dying, and Isabella was accused of being a witch. She of course denied it. However, townspeople approached her and cornered her in this farmhouse and lit it on fire. Miraculously, she walks out of the burning building with not even a single burn on her body, so that just confirmed to them that she was in fact a witch. They sentenced her to a slow death in the stocks, where she was humiliated and abused and tortured and eventually succumbed to starvation. She feels like an angry soul, and she's a witch. So I feel like she is way more threatening than a lot of the previous ghosts that I've already talked about. Like, I think she would genuinely come after me. I don't fear witches or anything, and I think that's a very negative stereotype that's happened in media over the years, but they do have more magical powers than your typical average ghost. However, it was never confirmed if she was indeed a witch or not, so we will never know. Say it with me now. Visually, I like how she looks. Now, this next lady would probably have to be ranked a little bit higher. I absolutely love her backstory. That is, of course, the only lady remaining, the angry princess. So Dana Newman suffered severe body dysmorphia and just could not see herself for how she truly looked, which was beautiful. But her insecurity was only fueled further by abusive partners. Her desperation and depression would lead her to apply for a position in a cosmetic surgeon's office, in which she was paid in but with procedures. Alone one night in the office, she attempted a cosmetic procedure on herself, which left her blinded in one eye. This left her completely distraught and out of control, and she mutilated herself until death. Her story is just so tragic, and I think she's one of the most famous ghosts. Obviously, for one fact, she is completely naked, and I feel like that's the wrong reason that she should be popularized. Just a very tragic story, and obviously she would hurt me. That's been, proven based on the movie. She is out with a vengeance. She wants to kill people. She's gonna kill you. So yeah, she's very terrifying to me looking wise and just conceptually, and she is just a violent soul who wants to be released. Okay, so this last category are my absolute most terrifying, keeps me up at night. Like, sometimes just looking at these ghosts freak me out, and these are the ones that really terrified me on the posters specifically. Just looking at them, they even to this day scare me so bad, like just conceptually, visually. Oh my god, these ghosts are so horrifying. Therefore are my favorite because they scare me like that. So up next we have the Juggernaut. So Horace Breaker Mahoney was a disfigured and oversized child who was relentlessly tormented. After his mother died, his father put him to work in the junkyard. After his father died, he then became a serial killer and would often bring his victims to the junkyard to kill them. His first victims were a pair of female hitchhikers, in which he used his bare hands to rip them to pieces. Not only would he murder his victims sometimes with his bare hands, which is how he got the name the Breaker, he would feed them to his dogs. So one night he picked up an undercover female cop, and it took over 12 men and 50 rounds being shot into him before he finally succumbed to death. Also, 3 of those 12 men died in the process. Anyone that is humongous, automatically gonna be horrifying. I think he's at 7 feet tall. Like, horrifying, terrifying, obviously not gonna outrun him. Definitely a million times stronger than me. He will break me in half with his bare hands. Yeah, I'd say he's pretty disturbing. I told the story before, but my stepbrother would tell me stories about this character in particular in the movie, how he would just break people break their back against a corner of a wall. And I was terrified of this movie because of that description and the movie poster. So I knew I had to rank the Juggernaut really high. He is one of the OG terrifying aspects of this movie that I refused to watch for so long because I thought it was going to be way too disturbing. Up next, we have easily the most terrifying ghost, in my opinion, the Hammer. So George Markley was a blacksmith in the early 1890s. One man from the town falsely accused George of stealing, and George decided to stand up to his accuser and deny the claims. For revenge, the man abducted his wife and child when they were walking home one day and killed them. George, of course, completely distraught after finding the bodies, tracked down the killers and beat them to death using his blacksmith's hammer. The townspeople were not happy with George, so they captured him, tied him to a tree, and drove nails into his body using his own hammer and cut off his hand. And these weren't just like normal nails, these are like blacksmith nails from back in the day. They were humongous. Obviously, if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. I just think visually, this man is so intimidating looking. Like, he's so terrifying. He is mad. Like, he just looks so mad. He's not ranked first because I like the backstory of number one, which you probably have figured out who my number one is by now. I like the backstory of that one more, but the Hammer had to be ranked super high because that man terrifies me so much. Definitely one of my favorite ghosts. His backstory, of course, very tragic, very sad, and just conceptually, visually, I could not beat him, like absolutely not. And finally, we come to my number one ghost from 13 Ghosts, and this one has also been my favorite for a very, very long time, the Jackal. Terrifying. This man is terrifying. So born in 1887, Ryan Kuhn developed a certain appetite for women. He was born to a prostitute, so I think he had some issues, and he would go out and attack prostitutes and eat them. They describe him as attacking these women like a wild animal. So hoping to cure his insatiable appetite for these women, Ryan checks himself into a insane asylum. This only made him descend further deeper into insanity. He would scratch the walls until his nails completely tore off. So after this, the doctors would keep him in a straitjacket in his restraints for 24 hours a day until he would eventually gnaw through his restraints. The doctors finally had to lock his head in a cage so he could not chew anything anymore, and they sealed him in a dark basement cell. A fire broke out within the asylum, and Ryan did have a chance to escape. However, he decided to stay behind and die in the fire. I've just personally always been fascinated by old insane asylums and how we used to treat the mentally ill and everything like that. It's always been a fascinating subject to me. With my psychology background and everything, it's genuine horror in history. So although this story is fake, I know that the horror of it is real. So I've just always loved the Jackal's backstory and how he like chews through his little caged thing. Oh my gosh, absolutely terrible. I think those scenes with the Jackal are the scariest in the entire movie. The fact that he will just scratch the shit out of you, like, oh my gosh. I think a lot of people will agree that he is the most disturbing and horrifying looking ghost out of all of them, and obviously the most, you know, terrifying because he's the one who's the most violent in the movie. So there you have my ranking and categories for all of the 13 ghosts. I would love to hear your rankings, or at least tell me your favorite ghosts out of the movie, the ones you think are the most terrifying. Are they the same, or do you separate those two? Do you look more at their story or more at how terrifying they are? I could talk about 13 Ghosts all day long, or any early 2000s movies, so if there's anything that you want me to discuss further in detail on this channel, The Ring maybe? Should probably do that. Just let me know, leave a comment down below what you want to watch. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.